What does it feel like when your very humanity is questioned in the place where you should feel safe? Imagine being 7 months pregnant, exhausted yet hopeful, stepping onto a plane where all you wanted was rest, and instead, a flight attendant's hand comes crashing across your face. Not just a slap to the skin, but a wound to the soul. The cabin stares, some whisper, some record, and in that instant, the choice is before you remain silent to survive, or rise to demand justice not only for yourself, but for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. If it were you, your child in your belly, your mother waiting at home, your future on the line, would you fight back, knowing the cost, or would you bow your head, hoping the storm would pass tonight? We step into the story of a woman who chose to fight, who turned her pain into power, and whose single phone call shook an entire industry. Stay with us, because what unfolds is not just her story, it could be yours. If this moves you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so more voices like hers will never be silenced. The hum of engines filled the cabin, steady and low, like a heartbeat beneath the floor. Skyjet Flight 7662 was boarding on a gray Denver morning. The kind of morning where clouds hung close to the runway and everything felt heavy. Doctor Amara Lewis stepped into the first-class cabin slowly, her hand resting on her belly. At 7 months pregnant with twins, every step was measured, deliberate. She had spent the last decade building her company, a health technology firm that specialized in predictive diagnostics, and she was used to moving fast. But today, even walking down the aisle felt like wading through water. Her husband, Marcus, had urged her not to travel. "You could do the meeting on Zoom," he said, worry tightening his voice, but the investors in New York wanted to see her face, hear her steady voice, feel her conviction in person. This deal could secure the next stage of funding, the kind that would push her company into clinics across the country. She promised Marcus she would rest on the flight. She promised her mother, Elaine, that she wouldn't overdo it. Amara lowered herself carefully into her seat. She placed her leather tote bag by her feet. Inside it, the thick binder of medical research she had spent weeks refining. The seat belt stretched awkwardly across her belly. She shifted, trying to find comfort, but the stiffness in her back reminded her that 7 months of pregnancy and air travel were never meant to be friends. She caught the eye of a passing flight attendant, a tall woman with blonde hair pulled tight into a bun. Her name tag read S. Doyle. Her smile was thin, professional in the way that meant it wasn't really a smile at all. "Excuse me," Amara said softly. "Would it be possible to get an extra pillow?" "My back," she gestured toward her belly with a small, apologetic smile. "It just helps when I sit for long flights." The attendant didn't move right away. She looked Amara up and down, her gaze stopping just long enough on Amara's skin to be felt. Then she shook her head. "Pillows are limited. We save them for premium passengers." Amara blinked. "I am in first class," she said gently. The woman's lips curved, not kindly. "Yes, and we prioritize certain guests." The words landed heavy, like something meant to bruise. Amara felt the sting, but forced her breath to stay even. She had learned long ago that raising her voice, showing her frustration, only fed the narrative others were waiting to pin on her. Strong, angry, difficult. She was all of those things in the right moments, but not here, not now. "All right," Amara said softly. She folded her hands over her belly and tried to shift again, but the ache in her back pulsed sharper. Across the aisle, a white man in a suit pressed the call button. The same attendant leaned down when he asked for a pillow. She laughed at something he said, then returned moments later with 2 pillows tucked under her arm. She handed them to him with a wink. Amara closed her eyes. A heat rose in her chest, but she swallowed it down. She thought of Marcus's words that morning. Stay calm. Choose your battles. She had promised him she would. The boarding finished, passengers settled, and the cabin lights dimmed for takeoff. Amara leaned back, wincing as another wave of discomfort pressed into her spine. Finally, she decided she had to try again. When the same attendant passed her row, Amara tried once more, keeping her tone calm, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you again," she said, "but I really do need that pillow. Sitting like this is making it hard to breathe. Please." The attendant stopped. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then she leaned down, her voice low but sharp. "You people always think you deserve more." Amara's chest tightened. She froze, words catching in her throat. The surrounding passengers shifted in their seats, pretending not to hear but listening all the same. Amara opened her mouth to answer calmly, firmly, but before the words came, the woman's hand struck her cheek. The sound of the slap cracked through the cabin, louder than the engines, louder than the shuffling of startled passengers. The sting burned across Amara's face. She gasped, her hand flying instinctively to her belly. The man across the aisle dropped his phone in shock. A young woman 2 rows back clamped her hand over her mouth. Another passenger, phone already in hand, began recording. For a long second, no one moved. The cabin was silent, heavy with disbelief. Amara's mind raced, the echo of the slap still ringing. She felt her babies shift inside her, a reminder that she wasn't just protecting herself anymore. Her heart pounded, and in that pounding came the voice inside her, steady and clear. "This cannot stand." She looked up at the attendant, her face calm, too calm, the calm of someone who believed she could get away with it. Amara inhaled, slow and deliberate. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out her phone, and unlocked it with trembling fingers. Marcus's contact glowed on the screen, but she scrolled past it. She pressed another number, Caroline Brooks, senior advisor at the Department of Transportation, an old colleague, someone who owed her a favor. When the line picked up, Amara's voice was steady, even though her cheek still throbbed. "Caroline," she said, "ground this plane. Right now." The cabin lights hummed, passengers whispered, the engines quieted as if listening, and in that moment, Amara knew the flight and perhaps much more was about to change. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. After the sharp crack of the slap, after Amara's words into the phone, there was only silence. Even the steady rumble of the engines felt subdued, like the aircraft itself was waiting. Passengers exchanged uncertain glances, some still clutching their phones, others staring down at their laps. The air was thick with discomfort. Amara lowered her phone slowly, her cheek still stinging. She could feel the heat radiating from the spot where Samantha's hand had landed, but she forced her breath into even rhythm. Her babies shifted inside her, and she pressed a palm gently against her belly, whispering inwardly, "We are all right. We are safe. I will not let this break us." Samantha Doyle stood frozen, her posture stiff. A flicker of something passed through her eyes. Panic, maybe, or calculation, but then her expression hardened into the practiced blankness of authority. She turned, almost defiantly, and continued down the aisle as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. A young man 2 rows back whispered to his seatmate, Did I really see that his voice trembled, caught between disbelief and outrage? His seatmate nodded wordlessly, clutching her phone tight. A middle-aged woman across the aisle shifted in her seat, torn between speaking up and staying quiet. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Silence won. Amara's phone buzzed in her hand. Caroline's voice was sharp, urgent. Amara, what did you just say? Ground the plane. What's going on? Amara closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Her voice, when it came, was calm, low, but carried a weight that could not be mistaken. A flight attendant struck me. I am 7 months pregnant. Caroline, I need this plane grounded before we leave the runway. Now. Caroline inhaled sharply on the other end. Stay calm. Don't move. I'll make the call. The line went dead. Amara slid her phone back into her tote and folded her hands on her lap. Her cheek pulsed with every beat of her heart, but her face was serene, almost unnervingly so. It was the serenity of someone who had made a choice and would not be moved from it. Around her, the murmurs grew. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, worried about delays. Others whispered furiously, their voices a blend of shock and anger. A man in business casual leaned over the aisle. Ma'am, do you really want to ruin everyone's trip over a misunderstanding? His tone was polite, almost condescending, as if she were a child making too much noise. Amara turned her head slowly toward him. She did not raise her voice. A misunderstanding does not leave a mark on my face. Her hand stayed pressed against her cheek for a beat longer before she returned it to her lap. The man's mouth shut, and he looked away. Minutes stretched, each one thick and heavy. Then, with a soft chime, the captain's voice came over the intercom, calm, professional, but strained. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been instructed by air traffic control to remain on the ground. Please stay in your seats as we await further instructions. A ripple moved through the cabin. Some groaned in frustration. Others leaned forward in curiosity. A college-aged passenger muttered, "This is about her, isn't it?" His voice was not loud, but the words carried. Amara sat still, her gaze fixed on the seat in front of her. Her mind replayed the slap again and again, the disbelief in the faces around her, the brief silence after impact. She thought of Marcus's warning that morning. Stay calm. Choose your battles, and felt the irony sting deeper than the bruise. Her conscience wrestled with her heart. Should she have let it go? Taken the insult, the pain, and quietly moved on for the sake of her children? Or was this the battle she had to fight, precisely because of those children? What kind of world would they inherit if she kept her head bowed? The plane doors remained closed, and tension hung like fog. After 10 minutes, 2 uniformed security officers entered the cabin. Their presence stirred a wave of whispers. They moved with deliberate calm, their eyes sweeping the rows. Samantha appeared suddenly animated, striding toward them with quick steps. Her voice carried just enough for those nearby to hear. Officers, the passenger in 3A has been aggressive. She tried to grab me when I was working. I had to defend myself. Amara felt her stomach twist, not from the baby's kicks, but from the familiar cruelty of lies told with confidence. Her hand gripped the armrest as the officers approached. "Ma'am," one officer said quietly, leaning down, "we need to understand what happened." Before Amara could answer, a voice rose from 2 rows back. It was the young woman with the phone. She stood, holding it high. "I have the video. Everyone saw what happened." She slapped her. A murmur of agreement followed. Others shifted, some nodding, some still hesitant. But the tide was turning. The officer reached for the phone, studying the screen. His brows furrowed, and he exchanged a look with his partner. Samantha's face drained of color for a moment before she forced another smile, brittle and fragile. "That video must be taken out of context." The officer didn't reply. Instead, he straightened and spoke into his radio. "Confirming passenger complaint. Incident under review. Holding flight." The cabin erupted in a wave of noise complaints, questions, nervous chatter. Amara remained still. Inside, her heart raced, but her expression stayed composed. She whispered inwardly again, not to the officers, not to the passengers, but to the lives within her. "Hold steady. This storm is not the end." As the minutes passed, the engines powered down. The lights flickered. The aircraft was no longer preparing to lift into the sky. It was grounded, and every passenger knew it was because of her call. Amara inhaled deeply, a slow breath that filled her chest. She knew this was just the beginning. She had chosen the harder path, and already the weight of it pressed against her shoulders. But beneath that weight was a steady flame she would not bend. The silence after the captain's next announcement was deafening. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will not be departing at this time. Please remain calm as we coordinate with authorities." Amara's eyes closed. She leaned back against the seat, feeling the bruised ache on her cheek, the restless stir of her children inside her, and the 1,000 eyes of strangers upon her. She was alone, and not alone, fragile and unshaken. This was the moment the world shifted, even if most didn't know it yet. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The hum of the engines had softened to silence, leaving only the rustle of restless passengers and the occasional cough cutting through the air. The scent of brewed coffee lingered faintly in the cabin, but it was overpowered by the tension pressing down on everyone inside. The plane was no longer preparing for the skies. It was being held firmly on the ground, and each person could feel the weight of that decision. "Doctor." Amara Lewis sat with her back straight, though every muscle ached. Her cheek still carried the memory of the slap, a dull throb that pulsed with her heartbeat. Her hand remained lightly over her belly, feeling the shift of her children within. She whispered inwardly, almost like a prayer, "Stay calm. Stay safe." She knew they could feel her stress, and she willed herself into steadiness for them. Passengers began murmuring louder, their whispers growing into scattered complaints. A man in a business suit muttered about missing his connection to Boston. A woman across the aisle sighed dramatically and said, "Unbelievable." All this because someone couldn't just move on. Others, quieter but resolute, spoke in Amara's defense. She was hit. Everyone saw it. What did you expect her to do? The division was palpable. 2 worlds existing in the same metal tube, pressed shoulder to shoulder yet oceans apart. The security officers had retreated to the front, speaking quietly with the captain. Samantha Doyle stood stiffly near the galley, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Her eyes flicked toward Amara now and then, sharp and accusing, as if daring her to flinch. But Amara didn't flinch. She sat still, her expression composed, though inside her thoughts churned like a storm. She thought of Marcus at home, waiting for her text that the flight had taken off safely. She imagined the worry that would tighten his chest when he realized she had gone silent. She pictured her mother, Elaine, already fragile, watching the news later that evening and seeing her daughter's name tangled in scandal. For a moment, doubt clawed at her. Was she protecting her children by fighting, or was she endangering them by stepping into the fire? The officer returned down the aisle, pausing at her seat. His face carried no judgment, only procedure. "Dr. Lewis," he said quietly, "for now, we need to keep everyone seated while the situation is reviewed. The Department of Transportation has requested a formal statement when we return to the gate. Do you understand?" Amara nodded once. Her voice was steady. "I understand. I will wait." The officer inclined his head, then moved away. A young woman, sitting just behind Amara, leaned forward, her phone clutched in her hands. "Ma'am, I want you to know I recorded what happened. If they try to twist it, I'll send it to you. You shouldn't be alone in this." Amara turned her head slightly, offering the faintest smile. "Thank you," she whispered. Another passenger chimed in, older, with gray at his temples. "I've flown for 30 years. I've never seen anything like that. Don't let them tell you it's nothing." His words were quiet but carried a firmness that gave them weight. For the first time since the slap, Amara felt a flicker of warmth in her chest. She wasn't completely alone. The captain's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to circumstances beyond our control, we are returning to the gate. Please remain calm. Authorities will meet us upon arrival." A chorus of groans and sighs filled the cabin. Some passengers muttered about lawsuits, others cursed under their breath, but the decision was final. The plane began to taxi back, its movement slow and deliberate. The engines rumbled low, as if echoing the collective frustration inside. As the plane rolled, Amara closed her eyes. Memories surfaced, uninvited boardrooms where her ideas had been dismissed until repeated by someone else. Hospital meetings where she was mistaken for an assistant instead of the lead researcher. Dinners where waiters had bypassed her to ask Marcus for the wine order. Each cut had been small, survivable, but together they had built a lifetime of bruises, invisible yet heavy. Today, though, the bruise was visible and undeniable. When the plane stopped at the gate, the officers stood again. One addressed the cabin. "We'll begin deplaning shortly. Please remain seated until directed." His voice was firm, commanding, and no one argued. Samantha shifted nervously, her hands tightening at her sides. For the first time, her confidence looked cracked. She glanced toward the captain, then back at the passengers. The silence pressed harder on her than it did on anyone else. Amara felt the shift inside herself. She realized she had crossed a line the moment she made the call. There was no retreat now. The system would fight back. It always did. She would be labeled difficult, disruptive, maybe even dangerous. She knew the language they would use, but she also knew the truth, and the truth had already begun to spread beyond the walls of this plane. The officer gestured toward her row. "Dr. Lewis, we'll escort you off first to make your statement." As she rose, the weight of every eye in the cabin fell on her, some sympathetic, some resentful, some curious. She adjusted her tote bag on her shoulder, pressed one hand to her belly, and walked the narrow aisle with slow, steady steps. Her cheek still burned. Her body ached. but her spine remained straight. When she reached the front, she paused just before stepping out. For a moment, she glanced back. The passengers shifted uneasily under her gaze. She said nothing, but her silence spoke louder than words. Then she stepped out of the plane, into a storm that was only just beginning to gather. The walk through the jet bridge felt longer than any Amara Lewis had ever taken. Each step echoed with the weight of eyes, of whispers, of the invisible storm already brewing outside. When the doors opened to the terminal, reporters weren't waiting yet, but she could feel their approach like thunder on the horizon. 2 uniformed officers guided her gently toward a private room, their silence almost respectful. They did not need to tell her that everything had changed. She knew. Inside the small conference room, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A table, a few chairs, a pitcher of water. Amara lowered herself slowly into a seat, her hand instinctively on her belly. One officer stood guard at the door while the other slid a notepad in front of her. "Dr. Lewis," he said, his voice even. "We need a brief statement for the record. You don't have to say more than you're comfortable with." Amara inhaled deeply. Her cheek throbbed as if reminding her of the moment. "I asked for a pillow," she said, her voice calm. "I was denied. When I asked again, I was insulted and then struck across the face. I am 7 months pregnant. That is what happened." The officer scribbled notes quickly. He didn't ask her to repeat it, didn't press for more. He only nodded, as if the simplicity of her words was enough. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, passengers who had seen the incident began to step off the plane. Some spoke to wait-in airline staff, others pulled out their phones. Within minutes, the first video clips hit social media, grainy but clear. They showed Samantha Doyle's hand striking Amara's face. The sound was undeniable. By the time Amara was escorted from the airport to a waiting car, the video had already begun its viral climb. Justice for Amara appeared on Twitter feeds, gaining momentum with every retweet. By evening, local news stations were running the clip on repeat, anchors speaking in tones of disbelief. Amara sat in the back of the car, her head leaned against the seat. Marcus's face appeared on her phone screen, his voice taut with worry. "Amara, I saw it, the video. Are you okay? Where are you?" She exhaled slowly. "I'm safe for now. They took me off the plane. I gave a statement." Marcus's jaw tightened on the screen. "I should have been there. I told you not to fly." "God, Amara." She cut him off gently. "We don't have time for blame. Marcus, the question is, what comes next?" Marcus hesitated, his expression torn between anger and fear. "What comes next is they'll try to bury this. They'll paint you as the problem. We need to prepare." As the car carried her home, Amara looked out at the Denver skyline, the mountains silhouetted in the distance. She thought of her children stirring inside her, of her mother, Elaine, waiting anxiously by the phone. She felt the bruise on her cheek and knew it was only the beginning. By nightfall, Skywing Airlines released a statement. The words were polished, carefully chosen. "Skyjet is committed to the highest standards of service and respect. We are aware of the incident aboard Flight 762 and have launched an internal review. Early indications suggest the situation involved a disruptive passenger. We take these matters seriously." The words landed like salt in an open wound. Amara sat in her living room, Marcus by her side, Elaine listening on speakerphone. Her mother's voice trembled with anger. "Disruptive passenger, You asked for a pillow. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. This is their playbook. Minimize, deflect, blame the victim. They're not just protecting that attendant. They're protecting themselves. Amara's phone buzzed nonstop calls from journalists, messages from colleagues, emails from strangers. Some offered support. Others demanded her side of the story. The world was watching, and it would not look away soon. The next morning, the headline stretched across national news: pregnant CEO struck on Skyjet flight. The footage looped endlessly. Amara's face, her calm voice given the brief statement, her hand on her belly. Those images became symbols in a matter of hours. At the same time, another narrative began to rise. Anonymous sources claimed Amara had raised her voice, that she had been difficult, that she had grabbed the attendant. It was the familiar reframing of truth, reshaped to protect power. Amara scrolled through the coverage, her heart heavy. She whispered to Marcus, "They're trying to turn me into the angry woman they always imagine. They don't see the restraint. They don't want to." Marcus touched her shoulder gently. "Let them talk. We'll answer with proof." Elaine, her voice soft over the phone, added, "You've carried heavier burdens than their lies. You carry 2 lives inside you right now. That strength, they can't take it from you." That afternoon, Amara sat at her desk, binder of research pushed aside, laptop open to an endless stream of news clips. She watched herself become a headline, a symbol, something larger than her own body and pain. She felt a mix of fear and responsibility. The slap had been personal, intimate, but the fight ahead was public, massive. She drafted a short statement for the press. "What happened to me on Skyjet Flight 762 was not just about me. It was about the way we treat people we do not expect to see in certain spaces. I was a paying passenger in first class. I asked for dignity. Instead, I was humiliated and assaulted. I will not stay silent." The words spread quickly, carried across networks, quoted by anchors, retweeted by thousands. The momentum built, and with it came resistance. Skyjet doubled down, announcing that their preliminary investigation showed no clear evidence of misconduct. Amara closed her laptop slowly. She felt the pressure of expectation pressing down. Every supporter was waiting for her to keep fighting. Every critic was waiting for her to fail. She touched her cheek, the bruise fading but still tender, and thought, "This is bigger than me." That night, as she lay in bed, Marcus asleep beside her, Amara stared at the ceiling. Her mind refused to rest. She thought of her children, of the world they would enter. Would they find doors closed before they even knocked? Would they inherit the same bruises she had carried all her life? Her hand drifted to her belly. She whispered into the quiet room, "I'll walk through the fire, so you won't have to." The storm outside grew louder, and she knew it was only just beginning. Morning sunlight poured across the Lewis living room, yet the house felt dark. The bruise on Amara's cheek had faded into a shadow, but the weight of the storm outside pressed heavier than before. Her phone buzzed constantly, flashing with notifications. Some were messages of support, strangers thanking her for speaking out. Others were venom anonymous voices calling her a liar, a troublemaker, worse. Marcus sat at the kitchen counter, laptop open, his expression grim. "They're moving fast," he said. "Skyjet's lawyers are already filing motions. They want to frame you as the aggressor. They're feeding the press stories that you raised your voice. that you were unstable. Amara sipped her tea slowly, though her stomach churned. Of course they are. That's how it always begins. Rewrite the story before it hardens into truth. Marcus hesitated, then turned the laptop toward her. It's more than that. Your company's hospital partner in Chicago. He paused, searching for the right tone. They've suspended the research trial. They said they don't want to be dragged into controversy. Amara's hand tightened around the mug. The research was her life's work, a project that could save countless lives. To see it placed on hold, not for science but for politics, stung sharper than the slap itself. They're cutting me off, she murmured, not because of failure, but because I refused to bow. Elaine's voice drifted from the couch. She had insisted on staying with them after the incident, unable to rest alone. Baby, they've always feared women like you, too smart, too strong, too unwilling to accept scraps, but that's exactly why you have to keep going. Her words were fierce, though her body trembled with frailty. Amara smiled faintly at her mother, but her chest ached. She glanced at Marcus, seeing the tightness in his jaw, the sleepless circles under his eyes. "And you?" she asked softly. "Have they come for you yet?" He sighed. "My biggest client just pulled their contract. Guess who sits on their board? A former Skyjet executive." His laugh was bitter. They're not even subtle. The blow hit hard. Marcus had built his law career carefully, step by step. To see his work crumble because of her fight filled Amara with guilt. "Marcus." He reached for her hand quickly, gripping it tight. Don't you dare blame yourself. I knew this was coming the second you made that call, and I would rather lose every client than watch you stay silent." Her eyes stung. She pressed his hand to her cheek, letting his steadiness flow into her. But even as he comforted her, the doubts clawed at the edges of her resolve. She thought of her unborn children, thought of the home they would enter, thought of the danger her name might carry for them. Was she creating a safer world for them, or a harsher one that evening? The storm grew worse. A news segment aired featuring a blurry photo of Amara at a conference years ago. The chyron read "Pattern of Disruptive Behavior." A panel of commentators, none who had been on Flight 762, debated her temperament. Amara turned the television off, the silence afterward louder than the voices had been. Marcus leaned back, his fists clenched. "They're laying the groundwork. They want to convince the public you're not credible." Elaine stood slowly, gripping the arm of the chair for support. "Let them talk. The truth has legs longer than lies. It may stumble, but it always catches up." Before Amara could answer, her phone rang. The number was blocked. Against her better judgment, she answered. A cold voice greeted her. "Mrs. Lewis, this is a courtesy call. Drop your complaints. End this now, or your family's lives will become very uncomfortable." Her hand froze around the phone. She whispered, "Who is this?" But the line went dead. Marcus saw the color drain from her face. "What did they say?" "They warned me," Amara said, her voice quiet but steady. "They warned us all." For a long moment, the room was silent. Marcus finally spoke, his voice like steel. "Then we fight smarter. We gather allies. We don't let them isolate us." But even as he said it, Elaine swayed on her feet. Her hand clutched her chest. Mama Amara cried, rushing forward. Elaine collapsed gently into Marcus's arms, her face pale, her breaths shallow. The ambulance ride blurred into beeping monitors and hospital walls. Amara stood by her mother's bed, guilt pressing so hard she could hardly breathe. "This is because of me," she whispered. "The stress, the threats, it's too much." Elaine's eyes fluttered open, her voice barely above a breath. "Don't. You. Stop. Promise me." Amara gripped her mother's hand, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I promise. I'll finish this." Later that night, sitting alone in the hospital waiting room, Amara pressed both hands to her belly. The twins shifted within, restless. Her mind wrestled with two truths: fighting meant danger, silence meant surrender. Which was more dangerous for the world her children would inherit? Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. A woman's voice this time. Hushed, urgent. "Dr. Lewis, my name is Nina Patel. I work inside Skyjet. I have evidence you'll want to see. They've been hiding complaints like yours for years, and it's worse than you think." Amara's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this? Because I can't stay silent anymore," Nina replied. "And because if you lose, we all lose." For the first time in days, Amara felt the weight on her chest lift just slightly. An ally, unexpected and unseen, had stepped out of the shadows. The fight was far from over. But now, she wasn't alone. The hospital corridors were quiet except for the occasional squeak of shoes and the low murmur of nurses changing shifts. Amara sat in a chair near her mother's room, her hands folded over her belly, her mind replaying the hushed phone call from Nina Patel. Every instinct told her this woman was taking a risk. That kind of courage never came without a price. Marcus returned from the vending machine with a bottle of water. He handed it to Amara, studying her expression. "You're somewhere far away right now," he said softly. She nodded, her voice low. "Someone from inside Skyjet called me. She says she has evidence, years of complaints, buried, records of discrimination, retaliation. She's willing to share it." Marcus's brows drew together. That could change everything, but it could also be a trap. Amara's eyes hardened. If it is, we'll find out. But if it isn't, then the fight is bigger than we imagined. This isn't about one slap. It's about a system built to protect itself at all costs. At that moment, Elaine stirred in her hospital bed, her voice, faint but insistent, carried across the room. "Don't waste your strength doubting. Take the help. Use it." Amara moved closer, holding her mother's hand. "Rest, Mama. I'll handle it." 2 days later, Amara met Nina Patel in a small cafe tucked between office towers. Nina looked younger than Amara expected, maybe late 20s, with tired eyes that darted nervously to every corner of the room. She clutched a worn laptop bag as though it were a lifeline. "Dr. Lewis," she whispered, sliding into the booth. "Thank you for meeting me. I don't have much time." Amara studied her carefully, sensing the fear under her composure. "Tell me why you reached out." Nina's hands trembled slightly as she opened her laptop. "Because I've been watching them bury stories like yours for years. I worked in data compliance. I saw the complaints come in racial slurs, harassment, physical incidents. They disappear into a folder no one is supposed to open. Management tells us to code them as resolved, even when nothing was done. I couldn't live with it anymore." She turned the screen toward Amara. Rows of spreadsheets appeared, each line representing a passenger, a date, a complaint, notes in cold, bureaucratic language passenger disruptive. Crew acted appropriately, yet alongside them were attachments, emails, handwritten statements that told the truth. Amara's chest tightened as she read. "This is a pattern," she murmured. "This is deliberate." Nina nodded quickly. "And it goes higher than you think. Gerald Doyle, the CEO. He's Samantha's uncle. He's been shielding her for years. Every time a complaint surfaced about her behavior, it was buried. I have copies of emails proving it. Marcus, who had insisted on joining the meeting, leaned forward. His lawyer's mind was already racing. If this is real, it's enough to crack their defense wide open. But releasing it could put you in danger. Nina, you understand that..." Her eyes glistened with quiet fear. "I know. They'll come after me. But watching you stand alone on that plane, I couldn't keep quiet anymore. If you keep fighting, I'll stand with you." For a long moment, Amara studied her. Then she reached across the table, her hand resting on Nina's. "You won't stand alone. Not anymore." The next week was a blur of planning. Marcus assembled a small legal team, friends and colleagues who still believed in justice over power. Nina began leaking documents quietly, piece by piece, to trusted journalists. Amara recorded a video message, not polished, not rehearsed, just her voice, steady and raw. "I was struck on Skyjet Flight 762. That is the truth. But what matters now is not only what happened to me, it's what happens to anyone who doesn't fit the picture of who they believe belongs in first class. My story is not unique. It is a window into a pattern, one that cannot be ignored any longer." The video spread across social media, millions watching within hours. Hashtags multiplied. Marches began outside Skyjet offices in multiple cities. Passengers came forward with their own stories. Some described being ignored, denied service, singled out for random checks. The pattern Nina had revealed was now undeniable. But Skyjet fought back. Gerald Doyle appeared on national television, his tone paternal, dismissive. "This is an unfortunate misunderstanding that has been exploited by outside parties. We stand by our employees and our commitment to fairness." The words rang hollow, but the power behind them was real. Overnight, Amara's inbox filled with threats. Marcus's office was vandalized, windows shattered. Elaine's hospital room received anonymous calls, cruel voices telling her daughter to know her place. Through it all, Amara's resolve deepened. She spoke softly to her unborn children each night, her hand resting on her belly. "You will not inherit silence," she whispered. "You will inherit a world where voices are heard." One evening, Nina arrived at their home, her face pale, her hands shaking. "They know it's me," she said. "Someone followed me after work. I think they've been watching my apartment." Amara drew her inside quickly, Marcus locking the door behind them. Nina's fear was raw, but beneath it was a steel that mirrored Amara's own. "I'm not backing out," Nina said firmly. "Not now. Not when the truth is finally out there." Amara placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice steady. "Then we walk together, no matter what comes." That night, as she sat awake, the city lights flickering outside the window, Amara felt the enormity of the moment settle on her. She was not only carrying 2 children, she was carrying the weight of countless silenced voices. The slap had been the spark, but the fire was now a blaze stretching beyond her own life. And for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt certainty. The weeks after Nina Patel's disclosures felt like a whirlwind spiraling faster each day. Amara Lewis woke each morning to a flood of new headlines. Some celebrated her bravery, calling her a voice for the silenced. Others tried to smear her, spinning narratives about ambition, instability, or greed. But no matter the angle, one fact was certain. Her name was everywhere. Skyjet doubled its counterattack. The company's legal team, led by Richard Harlow, issued statements portraying her as manipulative. This is a coordinated attempt to damage a respected airline, he declared at a press conference, his crisp suit and polished smile designed to radiate confidence. Yet, behind his eyes, there was something harder, something less certain. Amara watched the broadcast from her living room, Marcus pacing beside her. "They're trying to grind you down," he muttered. "Drag your name through the mud until people don't know what to believe." She placed a hand on her belly, feeling the steady kicks within. "Then I have to hold my ground until the truth speaks louder than their noise." The strain weighed on her body. Nights grew longer, sleep fitful. Sometimes she jolted awake with the memory of the slap, the sound echoing in her ears. Other times, it was the thought of her mother's fragile heartbeat or Marcus's weary shoulders carrying the weight of lost clients. Yet, when she looked at Nina, pale but resolute, she reminded herself this wasn't just her fight anymore. Nina's leaks continued, each new file painting a darker picture. One email revealed executives discussing which passengers fit the premium profile. Another showed Samantha Doyle's repeated misconduct, passengers calling her abusive, even dangerous. Yet every report was closed with Gerald Doyle's signature. Journalists pounced, stories appearing daily, public anger swelled, protests grew. Outside Skyjet headquarters, crowds gathered with signs all seats earned, all faces welcome. But as the movement grew, so did the backlash. Anonymous messages poured into Amara's phone. Some threatened violence. Others targeted her children, not yet born, with chilling words. One evening, Marcus found a brick thrown through their front window. Attached was a note, "Drop it or lose everything." Elaine insisted on staying with them, though her health was fragile. "If they think fear will silence us, they don't know our family," she said, her voice raspy but fierce. Still, Amara watched her mother's hands tremble and wondered how much more she could bear. Meanwhile, Skyjet executives scrambled. Behind closed doors, Gerald Doyle barked orders at his team. "We cannot let this spiral. Lock down the files, shut down the leaks, and get me something we can use against her." His loyalty to Samantha was unyielding, but cracks were forming. Investors began whispering about his judgment, about the cost of shielding family over accountability. At home, Amara wrestled with doubt. Late one night, as Marcus slept, she sat by the window with her journal. She wrote not about lawsuits or protests, but about fear. Fear that her children would inherit scars before they even took their first breath. Fear that the system would crush not only her, but those standing with her. Yet beneath the fear, a quiet strength pulsed. She thought of Nina risking her career, of strangers marching in the streets, of her mother's trembling voice urging her forward. She whispered into the dark, "If I stand, others stand with me. That is the only way forward." The next day, she met with Caroline Brooks at a small federal office. Caroline, sharp-eyed and deliberate, slid a folder across the desk. "The DOT has been watching. The evidence Nina provided gives us grounds to open a formal investigation into Skyjet. But we need your testimony, not just the slap, everything you've learned since." Amara hesitated, her hand resting on the folder. Testifying meant exposure. It meant more attacks, more threats. Yet it also meant moving from defense to offense. She closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and nodded. "I'll testify." When the news broke that the Department of Transportation was launching an inquiry, the country's attention sharpened. Talk shows dissected every angle. Advocacy groups rallied, and politicians weighed in. For the first time, Skyjet's power seemed less certain, but the company didn't retreat quietly. The very next day, headlines erupted with a new scandal CEO's company under scrutiny. Skyjet's PR machine had dug into Amara's health tech firm, seizing on minor delays in clinical trials, spinning them into accusations of negligence. Marcus slammed the paper onto the counter. "This is war. They'll burn everything to the ground just to discredit you." Amara read the headline slowly, then set the paper aside. "If they think this will scare me back into silence, they don't understand why I started this fight." That evening, Nina arrived with another revelation. Her hands shook as she held out a flash drive. This is the worst of it. They didn't just bury complaints. They manipulated safety reports, flights cleared with equipment issues, crews pushed beyond legal limits. If this gets out, it's not just about discrimination, it's about endangering lives. Amara felt the gravity settle like stone. This was bigger than bruises, bigger than insults. This was systemic negligence that could cost lives. She looked at Nina, at Marcus, at her mother resting in the next room. "Then the world needs to see it?" Her voice was calm, but inside her chest, her heart thundered. The escalation had begun. There was no turning back now. The flash drive sat on the kitchen table like a loaded weapon. Marcus stared at it as though it might explode, while Amara rested her hands over her stomach, feeling the twins shifting inside. Nina Patel's face was pale, her eyes haunted but determined. "Everything's on here," she whispered. "Internal emails, falsified safety logs, instructions to silence employees who raised concerns. If this goes public, Skyjet won't survive." Marcus leaned forward, his tone grave. "Then we have to move carefully. They'll come for you. Nina, they'll come for all of us harder than ever before." Nina nodded, swallowing. "I've already been followed twice this week. My supervisor suddenly asked about my loyalty. I know they suspect me, but I can't stop now. I'd rather risk everything than live another day pretending I don't know." Amara reached across the table, taking Nina's hand. "Courage is contagious. You've given us more than evidence, you've given us hope." For the next several days, Marcus and his legal team pored over the documents. Each file revealed another layer of negligence: planes cleared for takeoff with malfunctioning oxygen systems, pilots pressured to fly beyond their allowed hours, executives dismissing safety concerns as costly distractions. Amara felt sick as she read. "It's not just about dignity," she whispered one night. "It's about lives. They're gambling with lives." Marcus rubbed his forehead. Exhaustion etched deep into his face. "If we release this, the Doughty investigation becomes criminal. Gerald Doyle could go down, the entire board too, but the retaliation will be brutal." Amara looked at him, her voice steady. "Then we brace for it, because silence is no longer an option." The first wave hit the very next morning. A news outlet, clearly fed by Skyjet's PR team, ran a story accusing Amara of fabricating her assault. A so-called anonymous passenger claimed she had provoked Samantha Doyle. Commentators debated her credibility, some dismissing her as an opportunist seeking fame. Amara turned off the television, her jaw tight. Marcus touched her shoulder. They're desperate. They wouldn't be throwing this much dirt if they weren't afraid of what you have. But it wasn't only the media. Marcus's law license was suddenly under review by the state board, triggered by a complaint of unethical conduct. Elaine's hospital received an unexpected inspection that left her without necessary equipment for hours. The attacks weren't subtle. They were precise, coordinated, designed to break them down. One evening, as Amara returned from a meeting with her lawyers, she found graffiti sprayed across her garage door. Liar, troublemaker, stay in your place. She stood frozen for a moment, staring at the words. Marcus rushed to her side, rage boiling in his voice. They think intimidation will shut us up. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Amara touched the spray-painted letters with her fingertips. Her face was calm, but her heart pounded. This isn't about me anymore. It's about every person who's ever been told to stay in their place. We'll paint over it, and then we'll keep going. That night, as she sat awake, the twins kicked harder than usual. She placed her hand over her belly, tears stinging her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them. "I wish I could protect you from all this. But one day, you'll understand why I couldn't be silent." Days later, the Doty summoned her formally to testify. The hearing room was stark, fluorescent lights reflecting off polished wood. Journalists lined the back rows, cameras poised. Amara took her seat at the witness table, Marcus and Nina sitting behind her for support. Her hands trembled slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I am Dr. Amara Lewis. On September 14th, aboard Skyjet Flight 762. I was struck in the face by a flight attendant after requesting a pillow. That single act was not isolated. It was part of a pattern. Today, I present evidence that Skyjet has concealed not only patterns of discrimination, but patterns of negligence that endanger every passenger who steps onto their planes." She slid the flash drive across the table. The officials leaned forward, their expressions tightening as they opened the files. The room grew heavy as the truth unfolded. The hearing stretched for hours. Amara recounted the incident calmly, then detailed what Nina's documents revealed. Every word carried the weight of lived truth and undeniable proof. When she finished, there was a silence that seemed to stretch forever. Finally, one official spoke. "Dr. Lewis, your testimony and these documents raise serious concerns. This inquiry will expand into a criminal investigation." Outside the hearing room, cameras swarmed. Reporters shouted questions. Microphones pushed toward her. Amara paused only once, meeting their eyes. "This isn't just my fight," she said. "It's about safety, dignity, and accountability, and I will not stop until justice is done." The clip aired across every major network, replayed again and again. Support surged, but so did threats. Marcus doubled their home security. Friends distanced themselves, fearing association. Yet Amara felt a strange clarity settling over her. She was bruised, tired, carrying twins in a body that ached, but she was unshaken. That evening, Nina arrived at their home again. Her eyes were wide with fear. "They know everything now. Gerald Doyle himself confronted me. He said I'd regret betraying family." Amara drew her inside, her tone gentle but firm. "You're not alone anymore. They may have power, but we have the truth. and the truth has a way of outlasting everything else. For the first time. Nina smiled faintly, though tears glistened in her eyes. Then, let's finish this. As night fell, Amara sat by the window, city lights blinking against the dark. She felt her babies stir again, restless, insistent. She whispered to them, "The world you're coming into is hard, but I will carve out a place where you are not told to stay small. That is my promise." Outside, the storm of voices grew louder, and Amara knew she was approaching the breaking point not of herself, but of the system that had long believed it could not be broken. The morning after the testimony, the air in Denver carried a strange stillness. Amara woke before dawn, unable to sleep. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, watching the sky shift from deep blue to pale gray. Her body ached from exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. Every headline, every soundbite from the hearing replayed in her head. She could almost hear the collective gasp of the country as the documents revealed Skyjet's hidden negligence. Marcus walked in, his tie loosened, his eyes weary from a night without rest. He set a folder on the table. The fallout's already started. Skyjet's stock plunged 12% overnight. Investors are demanding Gerald Doyle step down. And Richard Harlow, he's scheduled to give a statement this afternoon. Amara sipped her tea slowly. They'll fight until their last breath, but the silence they've built is breaking. I can feel it. Later that day. She watched the broadcast of Richard Harlow's press conference. His tone was sharp, defensive. These allegations are exaggerated, fueled by opportunists who seek personal gain. Skyjet remains committed to safety and fairness. We will cooperate with authorities but reject the narrative that has been forced upon us. Behind his words, though, his eyes betrayed strain. He looked less certain, less composed. Amara leaned back in her chair. "He knows the walls are closing in," she murmured. By evening, more passengers came forward publicly. A mother in Atlanta shared how she and her teenage son were humiliated by crew members when they questioned their seats. A veteran recounted being denied service despite a medical condition. Each story echoed the same pattern. Social media flooded with hashtags, "Dear Ground Skyjet," "Your Justice for Passengers." The public anger became impossible to contain. Crowds gathered outside Skyjet headquarters in Dallas, chanting in unison. Television cameras captured the chants, the homemade signs, the tears of those who had been ignored for too long. Inside her home, Amara watched the live coverage. Nina sat beside her, nervously twisting her hands. "I never thought it would reach this scale," Nina whispered. "When I leaked those files, I just wanted the truth out. But it's bigger than anything I imagined." Amara placed a hand gently on hers. Truth always grows bigger than the one who carries it. That's why they fear it. But with the rising momentum came darker shadows. That night, as Marcus locked up the house, he noticed a black SUV idling at the end of the street. Its headlights turned off, its engine humming faintly. It lingered for nearly an hour before pulling away. Marcus said nothing to Amara that night, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. The next morning, Elaine's doctor called with worrying news. The stress had taken a toll on her heart. She needed rest, stability, peace, none of which their household could offer. Amara sat by her mother's hospital bed later that day, guilt washing over her. "I've pulled you into my storm," she whispered. Elaine's hand, frail but steady, squeezed hers. "Child, Don't you see I'd rather stand in the storm with you than hide from the truth outside of it? Don't carry this guilt. Carry the purpose." Amara's throat tightened. She kissed her mother's forehead, promising silently that she would not falter. The following week, the DOT expanded its investigation into a full federal inquiry. Subpoenas were issued. Former employees lined up to testify, emboldened by Nina's bravery. Some spoke of intimidation, others of safety cover-ups. A picture of systemic corruption began to form. Gerald Doyle, however, refused to bend. Appearing on national television, he declared, "This company will not be brought down by lies. My niece is a dedicated employee, unfairly maligned. I will defend her and this airline to the very end." Watching from her living room, Amara felt both anger and pity. Anger at the arrogance of his defense, pity at the blindness of his loyalty. "He still thinks blood is thicker than justice," she said softly, but the tide had already shifted. News broke that several board members were in secret discussions about forcing Doyle's resignation. Investors were bleeding money, and loyalty was a currency they could no longer afford. Amara's role grew heavier. She was invited to speak at a town hall in Washington, D.C., organized by passenger advocacy groups. Marcus worried the trip would be too much for her, but Amara insisted, "If I don't speak now, when the country is listening, then everything we've endured will lose meaning. On stage, under bright lights." Amara addressed a packed auditorium. She spoke not with rage, but with quiet conviction. "This fight was never just about me. It was about every traveler who has been told they are less, every worker silenced for telling the truth, every mother who feared for her child's dignity. We deserve an industry that values human life over profit, and we will not stop until it is real." Her words drew thunderous applause. Journalists captured the moment, her calm face glowing with resolve. Across the nation, people replayed the clip, some with tears, others with clenched fists of solidarity. But back home, threats escalated. One evening, Marcus found their mailbox stuffed with letters, all filled with venom. One note in particular froze him. "We know where your children will be born." He hid it from Amara at first, but she sensed the fear in his silence. When she pressed him, he showed her. For a long time, she stared at the words, her hand unconsciously gripping her belly. Finally, she said, "They think this fear will turn me away, but fear is the proof that we're closer to breaking them than ever." Marcus took her hand. His voice trembled, but his resolve matched hers. "Then we see this through, together, that night." Amara lay awake, listening to the rhythm of her children's movements inside her. She thought of the journey ahead, uncertain, dangerous, exhausting, and yet within her chest a fierce light burned. The silence was collapsing, and from its ruins a new voice was rising. The pressure against Skyjet mounted like an avalanche, but Gerald Doyle refused to yield. His pride was a fortress, and within it he doubled down. He summoned Richard Harlow and the inner circle of executives into a glass-walled boardroom, his voice booming with anger. "We don't retreat," he barked. "We don't apologize. We crush this narrative before it crushes us." Harlow leaned forward, his tone smooth but urgent. "Gerald, the leaks are devastating. The safety violations alone could trigger federal indictments. If we keep fighting head-on, the regulators will bury us." Doyle's fist slammed against the table, rattling water glasses. "I built this airline. I won't let one woman and a disloyal employee destroy it." His eyes burned, cold and defiant. "If we can't silence them, then we discredit them." Within days, a new wave of attacks began. Anonymous accounts flooded social media with doctored photos, suggesting Amara had staged her injury. A fabricated witness claimed she had slapped the flight attendant first. Websites carried hit pieces painting her as a manipulative CEO whose own company was collapsing under scandal. Amara read the stories in silence, her face unreadable. Marcus paced the room, furious. "They're trying to turn lies into truth by sheer volume. It's the oldest trick in the book." Amara touched her belly gently, breathing slowly. "Let them. Noise doesn't erase reality. It only delays it." But deep inside, she felt the strain. Each headline chipped at her spirit, each accusation another shadow pressing down. Nina Patel, meanwhile, was unraveling. She sat at their kitchen table late one evening, her eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. "They've frozen my accounts," she whispered. "I can't access my savings. And yesterday, someone keyed my car. I know it's them. They want me to break." Amara reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You're not alone. You stood up because you couldn't carry the silence anymore, and that makes you stronger than they'll ever be." Tears welled in Nina's eyes. "I'm scared, Dr. Lewis, but I won't stop. Not now." Amara smiled faintly, though her own heart was heavy. That's what courage looks like. Fear that walks forward anyway. The next blow came unexpectedly. Marcus received a letter from the state bar, notifying him of a disciplinary hearing. The complaint alleged that he had coerced witnesses and improperly influenced federal proceedings. It was absurd, but it was dangerous. Marcus read the letter aloud, his voice tight with rage. "They're trying to strip my license. They want to cut off our defense at the knees." Amara placed her hand on his shoulder. "They're desperate. Marcus, they know the truth is slipping through their fingers. Don't let them shake you." Elaine, sitting quietly in her armchair, spoke up, her voice soft but steady. "Every empire built on lies eventually burns. They're just throwing stones in the fire now. Stay the course." The following week, Amara received a call from Caroline Brooks. "Amara, I need you to hear this directly. The Department of Justice is considering opening a criminal probe into Skyjet. But Gerald Doyle has powerful allies. They're lobbying hard to stall it. If you want this to move forward, we need public pressure louder than ever." Amara hung up and sat in silence for a moment. She thought of her mother's frail smile, of Nina's trembling hands, of Marcus's weary eyes. The cost of this fight was written on all their faces, and yet, as her children shifted inside her, she knew she could not retreat. That night, she filmed another video statement. No polished studio, no professional script, just her, seated in her living room, the fatigue clear in her eyes, but the fire unmistakable in her voice. "They are trying to smear me, to silence Nina, to punish my husband, to break my mother. But this isn't about one family. It's about every passenger who trusts their lives to a company that values profit over dignity and shortcuts over safety. We will not stop, not until accountability is real." The video went viral within hours, sparking fresh protests in major cities. Outside Skyjet headquarters, the crowds grew larger, louder, angrier. Shareholders began to panic. Reporters hounded Gerald Doyle, his once cocky demeanor now cracking under the camera's glare. But retaliation escalated too. One night, as Amara and Marcus returned home, they found their front door slightly ajar. Marcus rushed inside first, heart pounding. Drawers were open, papers scattered across the floor. Nothing of value was missing. It wasn't a robbery, it was a warning. Amara stood in the doorway, her hand on her belly, her eyes scanning the wreckage. For a moment, fear pressed against her ribs, but then, slowly, she straightened. They want me to feel hunted. They want me to collapse, but I won't give them that satisfaction. Marcus wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his jaw clenched. We'll increase security. Cameras, guards, whatever it takes. They won't scare us out of our own home. The next morning, Amara returned to the hospital to sit with Elaine. She read aloud from her journal, stories of patients her technology had helped, stories of lives extended because of her work. Her mother listened with a soft smile. "That's who you are," Elaine whispered. "Not the lies they spread, not the headlines. Hold on to that truth." Amara kissed her mother's hand, tears burning her eyes. "I will, Mama, I promise." Later that day, news broke that several senators were calling for Gerald Doyle's resignation. The pressure was boiling over, yet Doyle remained defiant, issuing a statement. "This airline will not bow to mob rule. We will fight these baseless accusations to the end." Amara read the words on her phone and shook her head slowly. He still believes silence is stronger than truth, but the silence is already broken. That evening, as she stood at the window, the city lights flickering below, Amara felt the twins move inside her again. The weight of the world pressed heavy on her shoulders, but within that weight was a strange peace. She whispered softly, "We're close. Hold on with me. Just a little longer." The counterattack was fierce, but so was the resistance, and Amara knew the breaking point was near. The storm outside Skyjet's headquarters grew louder with each passing day. Protesters lined the streets in Dallas, their chants echoing against the glass walls of the corporate tower. All seats equal, all lives safe. The sound carried into the executive suites where Gerald Doyle sat stiff-backed at the head of the long mahogany table, his face drawn but unyielding. Richard Harlow adjusted his tie as he spoke, his voice low but firm. "Gerald, the board is restless. Investors are threatening to withdraw. They're bleeding money every day this continues. If you don't step aside, they'll force you out." Doyle's jaw tightened. "I've led this company for 20 years. I will not be toppled by a pregnant woman with a grievance and a disloyal employee with stolen files." His fists clenched, his knuckles pale. "If they think I'll bow, they don't know me." But the cracks were showing. Already, 2 senior executives had resigned quietly, citing health concerns. Rumors spread that others were negotiating immunity in exchange for cooperation with investigators. The fortress Doyle had built was beginning to crumble from within. Meanwhile, Amara Lewis watched from Denver, her body weary but her spirit sharpened. She sat on the couch, her mother dozing beside her, while Marcus read aloud from the latest news. 2 senators just called for a federal takeover of Skyjet operations until safety can be guaranteed. This isn't just about discrimination anymore. It's national security. Amara closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of it. What began with a slap had now uncovered an empire of lies. She felt both vindicated and overwhelmed. "It's bigger than I imagined," she whispered. Nina Patel leaned forward, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug of tea. "They're cornered. That's why the threats are worse. But once the first domino falls, the rest will follow. Amara nodded, though fatigue tugged at her bones. The twins were restless, her body aching with the strain of carrying both her children and a movement. Yet every time she wavered, she remembered the faces of those who had stepped forward with their own stories. She carried them, too. That night, Marcus found her awake again, staring out the window. "You need sleep," he said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I can't," she admitted. "I keep thinking, what if we lose? What if all this pain leads to nothing?" Her voice cracked, raw and vulnerable. Marcus knelt beside her, looking into her eyes. "Then we'll know we didn't stay silent, and that alone is victory. But, Amara, look at what you've done. People who never thought their voices mattered are speaking because you refused to be silent. That's already change." Her eyes softened, tears welling. She pressed his hand against her cheek. "I'm so tired, Marcus, but I won't stop. Not now." The next day, a shocking announcement rocked the country. Gerald Doyle's niece, Samantha Doyle, the very flight attendant who had slapped Amara, was suspended indefinitely pending investigation. The official statement framed it as a temporary measure, but insiders leaked that it was a desperate attempt to shield the CEO from further backlash. Amara heard the news on television and felt an unexpected wave of sadness. She thought of Samantha's face that day on the plane, the coldness in her eyes, the certainty that she could act without consequence. Now, for the first time, there were consequences. Nina spoke quietly from across the room. She thought she was untouchable. They all did. But the truth doesn't care about titles or family ties. Amara placed a hand over her belly. "I don't celebrate her downfall. I only pray it leads to change." Later that week, Amara was invited to testify again, this time before Congress. The stakes were higher, the audience larger. As she entered the grand hearing room, cameras flashed, reporters murmured. Marcus walked beside her, Nina trailing just behind, her eyes wide with both fear and resolve. When it was her turn to speak, Amara rose, her voice steady though her body trembled. "This is not about one woman's dignity. It is about a system that valued profit over people, silence over truth. I was struck, yes, but what struck harder was the realization that countless others had been harmed and silenced before me. Today, I ask you to ensure that silence ends here." The room was silent when she finished, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Members of Congress leaned forward, some visibly moved. The testimony was broadcast live, reaching millions across the nation. People sat in their living rooms, watching a pregnant black CEO stand tall against a corporate giant, her voice carrying more power than all the denials a skyjet could muster. That evening, Gerald Doyle addressed the press again. His voice was sharp, his words defensive, but his eyes betrayed exhaustion. "We will fight these baseless attacks," he insisted. Yet even as he spoke, shareholders were demanding his resignation, and prosecutors prepared subpoenas. Back in Denver, Amara returned home to find her mother awake, her eyes shining with pride. "I saw you," Elaine whispered. "You were steady. You were fire. Your children will know what it means to stand tall." Amara knelt beside her bed, resting her head against her mother's frail hand. For the first time in weeks, she felt the faintest glimmer of peace. The cracks in the Skyjet's fortress were widening, and justice was no longer a distant hope. It was drawn near. The congressional testimony set off shockwaves far beyond Washington. For days. Amara Lewis's calm but unshakable words replayed across every major network. Editorials called her a symbol of modern courage. Advocacy groups compared her to civil rights icons of the past. But while the country praised her resolve, the retaliation from Skyjet's inner circle sharpened into a final, dangerous edge. Marcus returned home one evening with a grim look. He laid a thick envelope on the table, anonymous delivery, inside photos. Someone followed you and Nina. They know where we shop, where we walk, even which hospital Mama visits. His hands trembled as he pushed the images toward her. Amara picked them up slowly. The photos were grainy but unmistakable. Her hand on her belly at the grocery store. Nina glancing nervously over her shoulder in a parking lot, Elaine in her wheelchair outside the hospital. A chill ran down her spine, but her face remained composed. "They're trying to terrify us into silence," she said. Marcus leaned close, his voice breaking. "I can protect you in court, Amara, but I can't protect you from shadows on the street." Amara reached for his hand. "Then we shine more light. That's the only way shadows disappear." The following day, Nina arrived with another bombshell. Her voice shook as she pulled out her laptop. "A senior pilot just contacted me anonymously. He's been forced to fly beyond legal hours. He has logs, audio recordings, and internal memos showing executives knew. He's ready to come forward if he's not alone." Amara's eyes locked with hers. "Then we stand with him. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about everyone who's been silenced." Together, they arranged a secret meeting in a quiet cafe on the edge of town. The pilot, Captain Andrew Lewis, no relation to Amara, was gray-haired, weary, his uniform jacket folded neatly across his lap. "I've flown 30 years, he said softly, his eyes heavy with fatigue. "But in the last 5, I've been ordered to ignore every regulation I was trained to honor. I've nearly fallen asleep mid-air, and if I refuse, they threaten my pension." He slid a flash drive across the table. "This is my proof." Amara accepted it with steady hands, though her heart pounded. "You're not alone anymore. Captain, your voice will matter." By the end of the week, the recordings leaked to the press. One captured a senior executive saying, "Fatigue rules are flexible when profits are on the line." Another revealed direct instructions to pilots fly or be replaced. The public outrage that followed dwarfed anything before it. Protests swelled into nationwide demonstrations. Airports filled with crowds chanting for safety and dignity. Passengers canceled flights en masse. Skyjet's revenue plummeting by the hour. Inside the company, Gerald Doyle raged like a cornered animal. "This is treason," he roared during a late-night call with Harlow. First, the niece gets suspended. Now, the pilots are turning. We have to strike back harder, but Harlow's patience was fraying. "Gerald, it's over. The board is meeting tomorrow. They'll demand your resignation. If you don't give it, they'll vote you out." Doyle's face contorted with fury. "I will not be betrayed by my own people." Yet the betrayal had already begun. Quietly, executives leaked to the press that they were cooperating with investigators. Safety inspectors arrived unannounced at Skyjet facilities. Every corner of the company was under a microscope. Amara, meanwhile, balanced exhaustion with resilience. Her mother's health fluctuated, some days strong, other days fragile. Marcus fought his own battles, preparing for his disciplinary hearing while defending whistleblowers. Through it all, Amara carried the weight of twins inside her, every kick a reminder of why she could not stop. Late one night, she sat at her desk writing in her journal. She penned words not for the public, not for the movement, but for her children. When you're old enough to read this, you will know your mother fought so you would never inherit silence. You will know that, even in fear, I chose truth, and I pray you will choose it too. Tears blurred her vision, but she kept writing. 2 days later, she was invited to a live primetime interview. The host, a seasoned journalist known for sharp questions, asked her directly, "Dr. Lewis, you've faced smear campaigns, threats, even break-ins. Do you regret standing up?" Amara's pause was deliberate. She looked straight into the camera, her voice calm but resonant. "Regret belongs to those who knew the truth and chose silence. I carry no regret, only hope that by speaking, others will find their own voice." The audience erupted in applause. Online, the clip went viral instantly. Supporters flooded social media with the phrase, "No regret, only hope." But the night after the interview, a stone shattered the front window of their home. The note tied to it read, "Last chance. Stop, or the next hit won't miss." Marcus wanted to move them into a hotel under guard. Amara resisted at first, then saw the fear in his eyes, reluctantly. She agreed, "But no matter where we sleep, Marcus, they can't make me hide. My voice won't be silenced by glass and threats." As the family settled into the guarded hotel, Nina joined them, bringing updates from Washington. The DOJ is preparing charges. It's not just civil anymore, this is criminal. They're talking fraud, endangerment, conspiracy. Amara exhaled slowly, her hand resting on her stomach. The fortress was collapsing, brick by brick, but in the ruins, danger still lurked. She could feel it in the heaviness of the air, the desperate growl of a beast cornered. She whispered to herself, "The whistle has blown, and now the world is listening." The boardroom of Skyjet was silent except for the ticking of a brass clock on the wall. Gerald Doyle sat at the head of the table, his jaw set like stone, while the other board members shifted uneasily in their leather chairs. Richard Harlow cleared his throat. "Gerald, the numbers are catastrophic. We've lost nearly a third of our market share in 2 weeks. Regulators are circling. Shareholders are furious. If you don't resign voluntarily, they'll demand your removal." Doyle's eyes flashed with fury. "You want me to surrender to a smear campaign? To a pregnant woman's theatrics, I've built this company from the ground up." His fist struck the table, rattling glasses of water. "I won't hand it over because of lies." But even as he spoke, the room told a different story. No one met his gaze. Some whispered quietly to one another. The fortress of loyalty he once commanded had thinned to shadows. That same evening, Amara Lewis received a call from Caroline Brooks. "Amara, the DOJ is finalizing indictments against Skyjet executives. It won't be long now, but there's something else. Congress is considering drafting a new bill based on your case. They're calling it the Passenger Dignity and Safety Act." Amara gripped the phone, her breath catching. "A law." "Yes," Caroline replied. "Your testimony has become the blueprint. If it passes, it will reshape how airlines operate nationwide." Amara sat in stunned silence. She had fought to survive, to protect her family, to reveal the truth. And now that fight was sparking something larger, a transformation she had never dared to imagine. But as the tide turned, the threats grew darker. Marcus returned to the hotel one night, his face grim. "I got word from a friend inside law enforcement. There's chatter about targeting Nina directly. Gerald's allies want to make an example of her. Nina, sitting in the corner with her laptop, looked up with wide eyes. If they want me gone, so be it. I knew this was possible when I started." Her voice wavered, but her resolve held. "But I won't back down." Amara crossed the room and knelt beside her. "You've already given more than anyone could ask, but you're not alone. Nina, we protect each other now." Meanwhile, Elaine's health faltered. She lay in her hospital bed, her voice weaker each day. One afternoon, she whispered to Amara, "Child, don't let them take your light. Even when my eyes close, yours must stay open. Promise me." Tears burned Amara's eyes as she pressed her mother's hand to her lips. "I promise. Mama, I won't stop." The next morning, headlines erupted. Skyjet board calls emergency vote. Analysts speculated it would be Gerald Doyle's final stand. Protesters camped outside the Dallas Tower, their chants carrying through the glass walls. Television trucks lined the streets, cameras waiting for history to turn. Amara watched from the hotel, her heart pounding. Nina sat beside her, biting her nails. Marcus stood at the window, arms crossed. Hours passed until finally, news broke the board had voted. Gerald Doyle was out. The announcement spread like wildfire. Crowds outside the headquarters erupted in cheers. Reporters rushed to cover the moment. For the first time in decades, Skyjet would operate without its founder at the helm. Amara exhaled deeply, her shoulders trembling with relief, but she knew this was not the end. Doyle was gone, but the culture he created still lingered. That night, as she lay in bed, she felt the twins shift restlessly inside her. She whispered into the dark, "We're closer now, but the work isn't finished. Not until every voice is safe." The following day, a surprising twist shook the narrative. Samantha Doyle, the disgraced flight attendant, released a statement through her lawyer. She accused her uncle of pressuring her for years, protecting her misconduct in exchange for loyalty. "I was wrong," the statement read, "but I was also a pawn in a larger game." The admission stunned the public. For the first time, Samantha showed cracks of remorse. Some dismissed it as self-preservation, but others saw it as a glimpse into the toxic system Gerald Doyle had engineered. Amara read the statement carefully. She felt no triumph, only a deep weariness. "Even those who hurt us," she said softly to Marcus, "were shaped by the system they served. That doesn't excuse them, but it shows why the system must change." With Gerald ousted, the DOJ accelerated its work. Indictments were filed against multiple executives. Pilots came forward in waves, their testimonies echoing Captain Andrew Lewis's warnings. Passengers who had stayed silent for years now flooded hotlines with their stories. Amara's own days blurred together between hospital visits, interviews, and legal meetings. Her body strained under the weight of twins and turmoil. Yet each morning she rose again, her resolve unshaken. One evening, as she prepared for another interview, Marcus placed a hand on her arm. "You've carried this fight farther than anyone thought possible, but you need to think about yourself too, about the babies." Amara looked into his tired eyes and smiled faintly. "I think about them every moment. That's why I keep going, because they deserve a world where dignity isn't negotiable." As the week closed, headlines declared the Skyjet in freefall. Justice Department files charges, new federal legislation in draft. The fortress had cracked, The tide had turned, and Amara's voice was no longer just her own. It was a chorus carried by thousands, and deep inside, she knew the next stage was coming, the moment when justice would no longer be just promised, but delivered. The news of Gerald Doyle's ousting electrified the nation. For many, it was proof that even the most entrenched power could fall. Outside Skyjet headquarters, protesters erupted in cheers, waving signs high in the air. Reporters filled the airwaves with speculation about who would lead the airline next and whether the company could survive the storm. But inside Amara Lewis's hotel room in Denver, the mood was not celebratory. Marcus scrolled through his phone, his brow furrowed. Gerald may be gone, but his allies aren't. Some of them are already plotting a counteroffensive. They're angry. Amara, they're dangerous. Nina Patel sat hunched at the edge of the bed, her laptop open. He may have lost his title, but Doyle still has influence. I'm seeing chatter online posts from accounts linked to his supporters calling you a traitor, me a criminal, Marcus a fraud. They're spinning this like he was the victim of a witch hunt. Amara exhaled slowly, her hand resting on her belly. Power never surrenders quietly, but the louder they shout, the clearer the truth becomes. Even as she said it, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was a grainy photo of her hospital bag packed by the door, a caption beneath it. "We're closer than you think." Marcus saw the color drain from her face and grabbed the phone. His jaw tightened. "That's it. I'm calling federal protection. This has gone beyond intimidation." Amara's voice trembled but steadied quickly. "Do it." "But Marcus, don't let fear rule us. Fear is their weapon." Within 24 hours, federal marshals were assigned to her detail. The hotel corridors filled with quiet, watchful figures. Elaine, fragile but fiercely proud, insisted on staying with her daughter. "If they think I'll hide, they've forgotten who raised you," she said, though her trembling hands betrayed her exhaustion. The next morning, a televised interview with a former Skyjet employee lit another spark. The man, his face blurred for anonymity, claimed that Gerald Doyle had personally ordered cover-ups after serious mid-air incidents. "We were told to bury the reports," he said. "If passengers had known how close they came to disaster, the company would have collapsed years ago." Amara watched the interview, her stomach tightening. She felt the weight of it pressing on her chest. Marcus caught her gaze. "This is the firestorm. Everything we've carried is igniting now." Nina nodded, her voice low. "The DOJ will have no choice. They'll have to move on indictments. Indeed, within days. The Justice Department announced criminal charges against multiple former and current Skyjet executives. Wire fraud, conspiracy, endangerment. The headlines flashed across every screen. The fortress had not only cracked, it was burning, but the blaze was dangerous. Gerald Doyle, no longer CEO but still defiant, released a video statement from an undisclosed location. His face was pale, his eyes wild with fury. "This is a vendetta, led by a woman who seeks fame, aided by traitors in my own company. They can destroy my career, but they will never destroy my truth. I will fight until my last breath." The video went viral, his supporters rallying online. For every message of solidarity Amara received, she now got one filled with venom. Threats multiplied. Nina's apartment was vandalized, windows smashed. Marcus's office was flooded with harassing calls. One evening, as Amara walked the hotel corridor with a marshal trailing behind, she whispered to herself, How much longer can we endure this?" She pressed her palm against her stomach, feeling the twins shift as though answering. "Just a little longer," she murmured. "We're almost there." The stress weighed heavily on her body. At a doctor's appointment, her physician frowned. "Your blood pressure is elevated. You need rest, Amara. Stress at this stage is dangerous for you and the babies." Amara forced a smile. "Rest isn't an option right now." Afterward, Marcus confronted her. "You can't keep carrying the whole world on your shoulders, not when it's putting you at risk." She looked at him with weary eyes. "If I stop, Marcus," the silence wins again, "I can't let that happen. Not for me, not for them." Her hand lingered over her belly. "These children will inherit the world I fight for. I won't hand them one built on silence." Days later, she was summoned to testify once more, this time at a federal court hearing against the indicted executives. The courthouse was swarming with press, the air electric with anticipation. Amara stepped from the car flanked by marshals, her figure calm, her presence commanding despite the weight of fatigue. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Executives in dark suits sat at the defense table, their eyes cold. Across the aisle, Amara took her seat. When she spoke, the room fell silent. "I did not choose this fight," she began, her voice steady. "It chose me when I was struck across the face for daring to ask for dignity. And in that moment, I realized it was not only my dignity under attack, it was the dignity of every passenger, every worker, every voice silenced by fear. I stand here not for revenge, but for truth, and truth will not be silenced." Her words rippled across the room, recorded by every camera, replayed across the nation within hours. Commentators called it a defining moment in the battle for accountability. That night, back at the hotel, Amara sat by the window while the city glowed beneath her. Nina joined her quietly. "When I first gave you those files, I didn't know if it would change anything. But now, look at what's happening. The walls are falling." Amara turned to her, her voice soft but resolute. "Truth always finds cracks, and once it seeps in, nothing can hold it back." As dawn broke the next morning, Amara wrote another entry in her journal. "We are in the firestorm now. It burns, it consumes, it terrifies. But fire also clears the way for something new to grow, and that is why we endure." The tide had turned, the fortress was aflame, and the world was watching what would rise from the ashes. Snow fell lightly across Denver the morning Amara Lewis awoke with a sharp pain in her side. At first, she dismissed it as the weight of carrying twins. But when the pain returned stronger, Marcus rushed to her side. "We're going to the hospital," he said firmly. Amara shook her head. "I can't, Marcus. The hearing is tomorrow. They need me there." Marcus cupped her face, his eyes fierce with worry. "They need you alive. Our children need you alive. You've carried the weight of a nation now. Let someone carry you." Reluctantly, Amara agreed. In the hospital, monitors tracked her baby's movements, their tiny hearts beating strong but insistent. The doctor's voice was serious. "You're under extreme stress. If you don't rest, we could be looking at premature labor." As Amara lay in the sterile room, Elaine reached for her hand. Her mother's voice, though weak, carried quiet steel. "Child, your fight has already changed the world. Don't lose yourself now. Justice doesn't depend on one body. It depends on the truth, and the truth is already free." Amara closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. She had stood before cameras, courtrooms, and crowds without faltering, but here, in the stillness, she felt fragile. "Mama, what if I can't carry it any more?" Elaine's fingers tightened around hers. "Then others will. That's what you've taught them." While Amara rested, Nina Patel continued the fight on the outside. She appeared in interviews, her voice shaken but clear, recounting the files, the cover-ups, the nights of fear. "I never wanted the spotlight," she told one anchor. "But when silence endangers lives, speaking is the only choice." Her courage resonated, strengthening the movement Amara had sparked. Meanwhile, Marcus faced his disciplinary hearing. Surrounded by hostile attorneys, he stood tall, presenting evidence that the complaint against him was manufactured. "My only crime," he told the board, "was defending my wife against an empire of lies." After hours of deliberation, the charges were dismissed. Marcus returned to the hospital with weary eyes but a triumphant smile. "They couldn't break me," he whispered as he kissed Amara's forehead. The next day, despite her doctor's warnings, Amara insisted on recording a statement for the federal hearing she could not attend in person. Sitting upright in her hospital bed, with monitors softly beeping, she looked directly into the camera. "I cannot stand before you today," she began, "because I'm carrying two lives that remind me why this fight matters. But no, this justice does not pause for fear, for threats, or for pain. It continues because we demand it. And I demand it still." The video played in the courtroom the following morning. Jurors, officials, and the press watched in silence as Amara's calm strength filled the screen. Some wiped their eyes, others nodded solemnly. The clip spread quickly. Headlines reading, "From Hospital Bed, Amara Lewis Speaks Truth." Back in Dallas, Gerald Doyle released another statement, his voice edged with desperation. "They parade a woman in a hospital bed to sway your pity. But pity does not equal truth. Skyjet is being dismantled by lies." But the words rang hollow. The nation had already seen too much. Executives pleaded guilty, one by one. Their cooperation deals splashed across the news. Richard Harlow disappeared from public view, his silence a tacit admission of defeat. One evening, as Amara sat by her hospital window, snow still falling softly outside, Marcus placed a stack of letters in her lap. They arrived today, from strangers, from people you've never met. Amara opened the first envelope. A handwritten note read, "Because of you. I told my boss about the abuse I endured. Because of you, I believe my voice matters." Another letter said, "My father was a Skyjet pilot. He was terrified to speak. Now, he's found courage. Thank you." Amara pressed the letters to her chest, overcome. For a moment, the weight of fear, exhaustion, and pain lifted, replaced by a quiet certainty. "This is why," she whispered. "This is why it all matters." Nina entered the room later, her laptop in hand. "The DOJ just confirmed it," she said breathlessly. "The trial against Doyle himself is moving forward. They want you to testify once more when you're ready." Amara looked at Marcus, then at her mother, then back at Nina. Her voice was soft but resolute. "I'll be there, not because I want revenge, but because the truth must have the last word." As the night settled in, Amara placed her journal on the bedside table. She wrote slowly, carefully, her hand trembling but steady. "The breaking point is not the end. It is the place where fear falls apart and truth breaks through. We are there now. and I will not turn back." She closed the journal, laid her hand over her belly, and whispered to her unborn children, "We're almost through the fire. Hold on with me. The world you'll enter will not be perfect, but it will be better because we did not stay silent." The storm was reaching its peak, and Amara knew the next chapter would demand more than she had ever given. Yet she also knew that she was no longer carrying the fight alone. The nation was carrying it with her. The courthouse in Dallas loomed under a gray winter sky, cameras clustered at every corner, microphones angled toward its grand stone steps, crowds pressed against barricades, chanting in unison, "Justice for passengers, justice for workers inside." The air was thick with tension. This was no longer just a corporate trial. It was the trial of Gerald Doyle, the man who had once ruled Skyjet like a king. Amara Lewis arrived quietly, her steps measured, escorted by federal marshals. Though still recovering from her hospital stay, she insisted on being present. Marcus walked close, his arm steadying her, while Nina Patel followed with her laptop clutched tightly, her expression both anxious and determined. Elaine remained in Denver, too frail to travel, but she had blessed her daughter with a whispered prayer that morning. The courtroom filled quickly. Journalists scribbled notes, cameras clicked furiously, and the jury filed in. Gerald Doyle sat at the defense table. His once commanding figure diminished. He still wore a tailored suit, but his face was pale, his eyes ringed with sleeplessness. When he saw Amara take her seat, his jaw tightened, a flicker of bitterness crossing his features. The prosecution opened with a thunderous statement. For years, Skyjet endangered passengers and silenced workers. They concealed safety violations, manipulated reports, and retaliated against anyone who spoke out. And at the center of it all was Gerald Doyle, a man who believed profit outweighed human life. Gasps rippled through the courtroom as exhibits flashed on the screen, falsified maintenance logs, emails ordering silence, financial records showing bonuses tied to cutting safety costs. Each revelation hammered away at the myth of Doyle's invincibility. Then came the moment everyone awaited Amara's testimony. She walked to the witness stand slowly, her body weary, but her spirit composed. Sworn in, she looked across the room. Doyle's eyes burned into her, but she refused to flinch. "Dr. Lewis," the prosecutor began, "please tell the court what happened to you aboard Flight 762. Amara's voice was calm, deliberate. "I asked for a pillow. Instead, I was struck across the face by a flight attendant. But what followed was worse than the slap. I was mocked, threatened, and then silenced by a system designed to protect power instead of people. That system led me here today." She described the retaliation, the smear campaigns, the break-ins, the threats against her family. Her words painted not only her own suffering but the broader picture of a culture that thrived on silence. When the prosecutor asked why she had continued despite the risks, Amara's voice softened but did not waver. "Because silence would have meant surrendering the future my children will be born into. And I could not surrender that." The courtroom fell silent. Even jurors shifted in their seats, visibly moved. When it was the defense's turn, Richard Harlow rose, his voice sharp. "Dr. Lewis, isn't it true you've gained fame, media contracts, and public sympathy from this ordeal? Isn't it possible your motivations are not as pure as you claim?" Amara looked directly at him, her gaze steady. "Fame does not heal bruises. Sympathy does not erase fear. I did not seek any of this. It came because one man believed I did not belong in the seat I paid for, and because others believed silence was safer than truth. Harlow faltered, his rehearsed sharpness dulled by her composure. Even Doyle shifted uncomfortably, his facade cracking. Next, Nina Patel was called to the stand. Her voice trembled at first, but as she described the files she leaked, her fear transformed into fire. I watched reports disappear. I watched passengers humiliated. I watched safety rules rewritten in boardrooms. I leaked those files because I couldn't bear another day knowing lives were at risk. The prosecution then introduced Captain Andrew Lewis. His testimony about fatigue, about being ordered to fly beyond safe limits, brought visible outrage to the courtroom. I've carried passengers through storms, through emergencies, but the true danger was never in the sky. It was in the offices of men like Gerald Doyle. By the time the witnesses finished, the story was undeniable. Skyjet had been built on lies, and Doyle had overseen them all. The defense tried desperately to claw back ground. Calling Doyle himself to testify, he rose, shoulders squared, and spoke with the arrogance that once commanded boardrooms. "I am the victim of betrayal," he declared. "My niece, my employees, even passengers they've conspired to destroy me. Skyjet was strong under my leadership. This is nothing but a witch hunt." But under cross-examination, the mask slipped. Asked why safety logs bore his signature despite evidence of failures, Doyle stammered. When pressed on payouts to silence employees, he grew evasive. His temper flared, and in a moment, broadcast live. He shouted, "I ran this company like a king should, and if people couldn't handle it, that's their weakness." The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, even cries filled the air. The prosecutor let the words hang, then said quietly, "And that is why you sit here today, because no king is above the law." The trial stretched for days, each session peeling back another layer of corruption. Outside, crowds grew larger, their chants echoing through the city streets. Supporters held signs with Amara's name, while opponents still clung to Doyle's narrative. The firestorm of division spread across the country, but the weight of evidence was undeniable. Back at the hotel each evening, Amara collapsed into Marcus's arms, drained but resolute. "I didn't know it would take this much," she whispered one night. Marcus kissed her hair. "Change always costs more than we think, but you've already changed the world. Amara, can't you see it?" She closed her eyes, hearing the distant chants outside. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps even in her exhaustion, the tide had shifted permanently. When closing arguments arrived, the prosecution spoke with quiet gravity. "This case is not just about fraud or negligence. It is about dignity. It is about safety. It is about whether we allow men like Gerald Doyle to build empires on silence. We ask you to return a verdict that tells the nation no one is untouchable." The defense sputtered about conspiracies, about ambition, about vendettas, but the weight of their words could not balance the mountain of evidence. As the jury filed out, the courtroom buzzed with tension. Amara sat still, her hands folded over her stomach, whispering to her children. "We are almost there." For hours they waited until finally the jury returned. The foreperson stood, voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Gerald Doyle, guilty on all counts." The room erupted, cheers, cries, shouts. Reporters rushed for cameras. Doyle's face drained of color as marshals closed in. He turned once toward Amara. His eyes filled not with power, but with defeat. Amara exhaled, her whole body trembling. Tears welled as Marcus wrapped his arm around her. Nina clasped her hand tightly. "You did it," Nina whispered. Amara shook her head softly. "We did it, all of us." The trial was over. Justice had spoken. But Amara knew this was not the end. It was the beginning of something larger. The day after the verdict, the courthouse steps became the stage for a nation's reckoning. Hundreds of cameras pointed toward the doors, waiting for Amara Lewis. When she emerged, wrapped in a simple navy coat, the roar of the crowd rolled like thunder. Reporters shouted questions, microphones thrust forward, but Amara raised her hand gently. Her voice carried steady over the din. Yesterday's verdict was not about me. It was about every passenger who ever felt unsafe, every worker who was silenced, and every family who trusted a system that betrayed them. Justice does not erase the harm, but it lights a path forward, and we must keep walking. The crowd erupted in applause. Chants of justice for all echoed through the streets. For a moment, Amara stood still, letting the sound wash over her. She felt her babies stir inside her, as though even they recognized the turning point. That night, back in Denver, she returned to the hospital for monitoring. Elaine sat by her bed, stroking her hair gently. "You did it, child," she whispered. "You faced giants and did not bow." Amara smiled faintly. "I didn't do it alone. Mama, none of this was mine alone." In the weeks that followed, fallout rippled across the airline industry. Skyjet's stock plummeted, lawsuits multiplied, and regulators announced sweeping reforms. Airlines scrambled to distance themselves from Skyjet's legacy, vowing new transparency and accountability. Lawmakers unveiled the draft of the Passenger Dignity and Safety Act, citing Amara's testimony as its foundation. But for Amara, the victories came with exhaustion. Each morning she woke to new headlines, new interviews requested, new burdens placed on her shoulders. Marcus shielded her as best he could, fielding calls, arranging schedules, but he saw the toll it took. One evening, as snow drifted outside their window, he took her hand. "You don't have to be everywhere at once. Let the movement carry itself now. You've given enough." Amara leaned her head on his shoulder, her voice soft. "I want to believe that. But what if stepping back means losing the momentum we've built?" Marcus kissed her temple. "Movements outlive moments, and you are more than a moment. You're a mother about to bring 2 lives into this world. That matters too." At the same time, Nina Patel was grappling with her own storm. Though celebrated by many, she also faced relentless harassment. Strangers called her a traitor. Her family received anonymous threats, and her career prospects narrowed. One night, she confessed her fears to Amara over tea. "I don't know if I can keep living like this. My name will always be tied to Skyjet. I don't know who I am beyond that." Amara reached across the table, taking her friend's trembling hand. "You are more than what they call you. You're the reason lives will be saved. You're the reason truth broke through. That's who you are." Nina's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to believe it. Meanwhile, Gerald Doyle awaited sentencing in a federal prison cell. News outlets reported his downfall obsessively, once a titan, now disgraced. Samantha Doyle, his niece, faded into obscurity, her statement against him a bitter footnote to her career. For many, she remained the face of the slap that ignited a revolution. Amara tried not to dwell on them. Instead, she focused on her family. Elaine's health declined further, her once steady steps growing slower each day. Still, she insisted on knitting tiny blankets for the twins, each stitch infused with quiet love. One afternoon, as Amara watched her mother struggle to finish a row, she whispered, "Mama, rest. You don't have to push yourself." Elaine smiled weakly. "I want to leave them something from me, a piece of their grandmother to carry always." Amara's throat tightened. She bent to kiss her mother's hands, rough from years of teaching, now trembling with frailty. The months rolled forward, each day bringing Amara closer to giving birth. She declined most media requests, choosing instead to write in her journal. Her entries grew longer, deeper, filled with reflections on justice, fear, and hope. "We won a verdict," she wrote, "but the real victory will be in what follows. Will companies change, or will they wait for the world to forget? My children deserve a world that does not forget." When the draft bill reached Congress, Amara was asked to testify once more, this time before lawmakers in Washington, D.C. Her doctors hesitated, warning against travel, but Amara insisted. "This is bigger than me," she told them. "If I can stand, I will speak." With Marcus at her side and Nina nearby, she walked into the grand halls of Congress. Cameras flashed as she took her seat before the committee. Lawmakers leaned forward, pens poised. Her testimony was measured, deliberate, yet filled with quiet fire. She spoke of passengers humiliated, workers silenced, and systems designed to protect profit over people. She called for oversight, transparency, and dignity as non-negotiable. "Every traveler deserves safety," she said. "Every worker deserves respect. This is not radical, it is human." Applause followed, rare in such halls, but uncontainable. That night, networks replayed her words across the nation. Commentators declared her the moral voice of the aviation industry's reckoning. Back in Denver, after the long trip, Amara collapsed into Marcus's arms, exhausted but at peace. "I said what needed to be said," she murmured. He kissed her forehead. "You've carved a path no one can ignore now." In the quiet that followed, Amara returned to her journal once more. "The aftermath is not silence, it is choice. What we build from here will decide whether justice was a moment or a movement. I pray it is the latter." Spring sunlight spilled through the hospital windows in Denver, soft and golden. The air carried a hush, broken only by the steady rhythm of monitors. Amara Lewis lay exhausted but radiant, two tiny bundles swaddled in pastel blankets resting in her arms. One stirred, letting out a small cry, and Amara pressed a kiss to his forehead. The other slept peacefully, her tiny fist curled around her mother's finger. Marcus stood at the bedside, his face wet with tears he did not bother to hide. "They're perfect. Amara, just perfect." Elaine sat in a chair nearby, fragile but glowing with pride. She leaned forward, reaching with trembling hands to touch her grandchildren. "I never thought I'd live to see this day," she whispered. "Two new lives, born from courage." Amara's heart ached at her mother's words, knowing how frail Elaine had become. But for now, she chose only to feel the joy. She had survived the storm, carried her children through fire, and now they were here symbols of resilience, of hope, of everything she had fought for. News of the twins' birth spread quickly. Headlines called them children of change, born in the wake of a trial that reshaped an industry. Strangers sent cards and gifts, letters of gratitude, prayers for their future, for every cruel voice that once filled her inbox. Now there were hundreds of voices cheering her family on. But Amara remained grounded. Late at night, while Marcus slept and Elaine dozed in her chair, she wrote in her journal, "The fight is not over. My children deserve more than headlines. They deserve a world where dignity is ordinary, not extraordinary. That is the work still to come." Weeks later, she appeared again before Congress, this time with her babies at home, cared for by Marcus and Elaine. Lawmakers debated fiercely. Lobbyists pressed their influence, but momentum was undeniable. In June, the Passenger Dignity and Safety Act passed with bipartisan support. The law mandated stricter oversight, protections for whistleblowers, and penalties for discrimination in aviation. On the day the bill was signed into law, Amara stood beside the president at the White House. Cameras flashed, and applause rang out as the pen struck paper. She felt a lump in her throat as she realized this was no longer just her fight. It was now written into the fabric of the nation. That evening, Amara returned home to Denver. She held her babies close, whispering softly, "This is for you, for the world you'll grow up in." Yet even in victory, grief lingered. Elaine's health declined sharply in the following months. One quiet afternoon, as sunlight streamed into the living room, she called Amara to her side. "Child," Elaine said weakly, "I won't be here much longer, but I've seen enough. I've seen you rise. I've seen justice bend toward truth, and I've seen these little ones born into hope. My work is done." Tears blurred Amara's vision. She held her mother's hand tightly. "Mama, I'm not ready to lose you." Elaine smiled faintly. "You'll never lose me. I'll live in every choice you make, in every word you speak, in every breath of those children. Carry me forward, Amara." Days later, Elaine passed peacefully, surrounded by her family. At her memorial, Amara spoke softly, her voice breaking but steady. "My mother taught me that silence is surrender. She taught me that dignity is not given, it is claimed. I carry her lessons, and I will pass them on to my children, and they will pass them on again. That is her legacy." The months rolled on. Nina Patel, once hounded by harassment, found her place as a national advocate for corporate accountability. She launched a nonprofit to protect whistleblowers, with Amara serving as its honorary chair. Together, they traveled to universities, conferences, and community halls, sharing their story. Each time, Amara spoke not of revenge, but of resilience. The slap was only the spark. She often said, "What mattered was what we chose to build after the fire." Marcus, freed from the shadow of false accusations, rebuilt his career with renewed purpose. He became a sought-after attorney for those wronged by powerful institutions, his quiet strength admired by many. Yet, at home, he was simply husband and father changing diapers, rocking the twins to sleep, holding Amara close on quiet nights when memories threatened to overwhelm her. As for Gerald Doyle, he was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. His empire dismantled, his name tarnished. He faded into obscurity. Occasionally, tabloids printed rumors of his bitterness, his refusal to accept guilt. But the world had moved on. He was a relic of an era that no longer held sway. On the first anniversary of Flight 762, Amara returned to the airport in Denver. She stood before a plaque newly installed near the gates. Its inscription simple: "Dignity is a right, not a privilege." In memory of those who stood for truth, passengers paused to read it, some wiping tears. Amara placed her hand on the plaque, her children in a stroller beside her. For a moment, she closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She remembered the sting of the slap, the fear of retaliation, the endless nights of doubt. And she remembered the voices that rose with hers, the pilots, the whistleblowers, the protesters, the lawmakers, the countless strangers who refused to let her stand alone. She whispered, almost to herself, "We turned pain into purpose. We turned silence into change." Later that night, as she tucked her twins into bed, she reflected on the journey. The slap that tried to silence me became the echo that awakened thousands. Justice was never about revenge. It was about rewriting the rules so no one else would suffer the same. That is the legacy I leave to you. The house grew quiet, the city lights glowing beyond the window. Amara kissed each child's forehead, whispering a final promise. You will grow up in a world that still struggles, but also in a world that remembers. And as long as I live, I will keep building that world. Her children stirred softly, their small breaths steady in the dark. Amara leaned back in her chair, her heart both heavy and light. The fight had cost her dearly, but it had also given her something unbreakable, a vision of justice, not as an idea, but as a lived reality. And so the story of Flight 762 did not end with a courtroom, a law, or even a verdict. It lived on in every passenger who dared to speak, in every worker who found their voice, in every child born into a world made brighter by truth. The story of Amara Lewis is not only about one woman's courage, it is about the universal truth that dignity is not a privilege, but a right. In life, each of us will face moments where we are forced to choose between silence and truth. Silence often feels safer, but it allows injustice to grow. Truth is harder. It can cost us comfort, reputation, even security, but it is the only path that leads to lasting change. For older generations who have seen cycles of discrimination, struggle, and resilience, this story is a reminder that the fight for respect is never truly finished. Every step forward is built on the sacrifices of those who came before, and every time we choose to stand up, we make the path a little clearer for those who follow.